When you go out far away from the big city lights and you look up at the dark night sky, especially in the winter, it seems so easy to affirm what King David said. The heavens declare the glory of God, the sky displays his handiwork. But we're being told, however, by the media and by the scientific establishment that that's not the case. We're being told that the heavens, rather than declaring the glory of God, are the result of a cosmic accident they call the Big Bang. And there's a lot of problems with this Big Bang story, and no Christian should feel intimidated into accepting it. There are a lot of Christians who try to say, this is how God created the universe, but there's lots of biblical problems with that, and there's lots of scientific problems as well. And we could spend an entire talk on just the problems with the Big Bang. But one of the bigger problems it has is that it has a hard time accounting for the origin of stars. Now, there are trillions upon trillions of stars in the universe, and if you're claiming the Big Bang is how it all happened, you would think they would have a very good explanation for how stars came to be. They do have a theory, if you will. They think that there are giant gas clouds out in space, and that if something can compress that gas sufficiently so that gravity can take over and compress it some more, then you can get a star to form. Okay, well, gas clouds normally, they don't normally compress like that. So they think, well, maybe you could have a shock from something like an exploding star. Okay, it could compress that gas and make new stars. Well, that's all well and good, but the obvious question is, where did the very first stars come from? Okay, if your explanation for star formation requires stars to already be in existence, you've got a problem. Okay, so there's lots of problems with this Big Bang story. Now, an essential part of that story is that the universe is unimaginably old, almost 14 billion years old. But that clearly contradicts Scripture. Based on the historical information in the Bible, it's clear that the universe is only about 6,000 years old. And I want to make a point here that is sometimes overlooked. Despite what you see on TV and read in popular magazines, science cannot decide the age of the universe, not definitively. And that's because all age estimates are calculated numbers based on assumptions about the past. Okay, there isn't any instrument in a lab that you can point it at something and it tells you the age. Okay, these are always calculated numbers based on assumptions about the past, and those age estimates will only be as good as the assumptions behind them. Okay, different assumptions can result in different ages. And creation scientists and secular scientists have different starting assumptions. Secular scientists hold to a philosophy that they call uniformitarianism. And it's summarized by the motto that the present is the key to the past. So they claim that the processes we see going on today have always gone on like they are now, more or less at the same rates and intensities. And supposedly that can account for the origin of the universe. So if you apply uniformitarianism to geology, geologists would say, well, hey, since we're uniformitarians, if erosion it's slow today, therefore it's always been slow. And they would argue that something like the Grand Canyon required millions of years to form. But on the other hand, creation scientists acknowledge that there was an event called the Genesis flood in which erosion was many, many times faster than it is today. And you could carve out that Grand Canyon very quickly. So the one point I want to drive home to you this evening is that recent creation is reasonable. Now, the media and popular culture and even the scientific establishment want to make you feel foolish for believing that the universe is 6,000 years old. And what I want to impress upon you this evening is that don't listen to them, okay? Recent creation is reasonable, and I want to give you some reasons for that. First, our solar system really does look young. There are indications of youth all over the solar system, and some of these, even when you make uniformitarian assumptions, they limit the age of the solar system to just thousands of years. For instance, even when you make uniformitarian assumptions, Earth's magnetic field can only be thousands or tens of thousands of years old, and we'll explain why a little bit later in this talk. Likewise, comets, particularly comets that go around pretty quickly, what we call short period comets, they limit the age of the solar system to thousands of years as well. Okay, we're going to see lots of examples of that in this talk. Second, a creation scientist made a whole bunch of successful predictions about the magnetism of bodies in our solar system. Now, you may hear the secular scientists say, oh, creation scientists never make any predictions. Well, that's not true. And we're going to see a couple of examples here in this talk where Russ Humphreys, a creation physicist, made some successful predictions because he took the Bible seriously. And the only reason we're only going to do those two examples is because I don't have time to show you the rest of them, okay? But I could show you about 3 or 4 other examples if we had time. And finally, even the strongest arguments for an old universe have problems, okay? Now, there are some arguments for an old universe that seem pretty convincing. And these usually involve objects that are in deep space. And some examples of this would be things like colliding galaxies, okay? You know, there you can see all these photographs of galaxies out in deep space that look like they're colliding. And if you think about how far apart these galaxies normally are and how fast they're moving, that seems like a fairly strong argument for an old universe. I can at least see where the evolutionists are coming from. Another one, however, is the issue of distant starlight. This is the one we get all the time. Okay, the question is, well, you creationists, you're claiming the universe is 6,000 years old. You've got galaxies, distant galaxies that are literally billions of light years away. If a light year is the distance traveled by light in a year, shouldn't it take that light billions of years to get here? Okay, now what I want to point out to you, however, is that even these apparently strong arguments for an old universe aren't decisive. And for one thing, they involve even more assumptions than normal. Now, all age estimates involve assumptions, okay? That's true. But when you're talking about objects in deep space, they involve even more assumptions than normal. And so these age calculations are even more uncertain. And to use a little bit of lingo that may appeal to the Trekkies, the Trekkers. Star Trek fans don't like to be called Trekkies. Okay, to use some Star Trek lingo, okay, we've never traveled to the Gamma Quadrant and measured the speed of light in the Gamma Quadrant. Okay, we've never been to deep space. No creationist or evolutionist has ever been to deep space. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily the answer, but I'm saying that's the kind of thing you have to worry about when you're talking about these deep space objects. And a lot of creationists, myself included, think that Einstein's theory of relativity is the key to resolving these paradoxes, okay, where you can have clocks ticking at different rates, okay? We know that clocks can and do tick at different rates depending on things like differences in speed and gravity. And the theory of relativity raises the possibility that clocks in deep space could be ticking much faster than clocks here on Earth. But as measured by clocks on Earth, and the Bible was written to us here on Earth, the entire universe is just 6,000 years old. So a lot of creationists think that this is the key to answering this question. We've made a lot of progress on this in the last 25 years or so. I'm not sure that we've got the answer exactly right just yet, but I think we are making progress on this. So as creationists and Christians, relativity theory is our friend, okay? Satan did not invent relativity theory, okay? Now, if you think Satan invented quantum mechanics, I can understand that, okay? But no, seriously, relativity theory is our friend as Christians and as creationists. And the Big Bang people have their own problems with distant light. They've got at least one, maybe two problems with, one of these is called the horizon problem. It's one of the reasons they tacked something called inflation theory onto the Big Bang. It's their own version of a distant light travel time problem. And it seems to solve the problem, but it makes the Big Bang so weird that now even people who used to favor this inflation theory are now harshly criticizing it. Now, there's another issue involving distant light that the Big Bang has a problem with, and I think you'll find this one kind of interesting. You know, there are some very, very, very distant galaxies out there, okay, which they claim, okay, these galaxies would have existed just a few 100 million years after the Big Bang. Now, secular scientists assume, okay, that the light from these very distant galaxies takes a long time to get here. So it would take more than 13 billion years for that light to reach us, okay? That's what they assume. Now, if that's the case, we should be seeing these very distant galaxies not as they are today, but as they were more than 13 billion years ago. So they should appear young and unevolved. They should not appear well-formed. Well, guess what? That expectation is routinely contradicted. Okay, some of these very distant galaxies, they're constantly being surprised at how quote-unquote mature-looking they appear. And that tells me there's either something wrong with their idea about how galaxies form, or there's something wrong with the notion that distant starlight takes billions of years to reach us. This could actually be a clue that distant starlight is getting here a lot faster than the secular scientists think. So even though you've got some arguments that look fairly convincing, they're not decisive. They involve even more assumptions than normal. And not only that, we're going to see some examples in this talk of objects in deep space that are too young for the Big Bang. Okay, they're so young that they contradict the Big Bang. Okay, so it's not just creationists who may have apparent issues with the apparent ages of objects in distant space. The Big Bang people have that same problem. Okay, but their problem is in another direction. They've got objects that look too young. Okay, so with that introduction, what I would like to do now is I want to take you on a tour of our local cosmic neighborhood, and we're going to see all kinds of examples of evidence that our solar system and our universe are a lot younger than secular scientists are claiming. So we're going to start outside our Milky Way galaxy, and we're going to fly in at warp factor 7 to our own sun. Okay. Now, secular scientists claim that our sun and solar system formed from a rotating cloud of gas and dust billions of years ago. But these theories, what they call these nebular theories, have got a lot of problems with them. And we're going to see some examples of that in this talk. Now, secular scientists like to denigrate the sun and claim that it's just an average, mediocre star. There's nothing special about it. And that's not true. There are a lot of stars out there that are very similar to our sun, but every 100 years they emit these gigantic blasts of radiation. Okay, now if our sun did that, let's just say that it would ruin everybody's day. Okay? But God designed our sun so that it would not do that. Okay? Our sun is special, and we ought to be grateful to God that He designed it so well. Now, how old is the sun? Now, secular scientists claim it's about 4.5 billion years old, but there's nothing that requires you to believe that. In fact, there was a famous solar astronomer named John Eddy who said, you know, I think we could live with an age of 6,000 years for the Earth and the sun. I don't think there's too much in the way of observational evidence to conflict with that. Okay, now he believed that the Earth and sun were billions of years old, but he admitted that the data didn't actually demand that. Okay, moreover, if you believe the sun is billions of years old, you've got a problem called the young, faint sun paradox. Now, it's kind of ironic because the late Dr. Carl Sagan, who was always going on about billions and billions of years, was one of the people who first pointed this out. And they think, based on their ideas about how stars change over billions of years, that billions of years ago, supposedly when life was just getting started on Earth, the sun would have been much fainter than it is today. And as a result, the Earth would have received a lot less sunlight, and it would have been much colder, and the oceans would have frozen. Okay, now the problem for that is that most evolutionary scientists think the Earth was warm billions of years ago when life was supposedly just getting started. So what you have is you have one part of the evolutionary story contradicting another part, and that's why they call it a paradox. But this problem vanishes if the sun is just 6,000 years old, because you don't expect the brightness of the sun to change very much in just 6,000 years. Okay, so this is an indication that the sun isn't billions of years old. Okay, that it's really just thousands of years old. Now we're going to fly into our innermost planet in our solar system, Mercury. Now, maybe it's just me, but I have the sneaking suspicion that when the Lord Jesus comes back, he's going to make us change the names of these planets. It's just a hunch I have, but I just have a sneaking suspicion he's going to make us do that. But Mercury has a magnetic field, and that is a hint that Mercury is young. Now, why is that? Well, uniformitarian scientists think that in order for a planet or moon to have a magnetic field, it has to have a molten core. Now, creation scientists don't think that's necessarily the case, but uniformitarian scientists do. Now, here's the problem for them. When you have planets and moons, especially small bodies like that, they cool off relatively quickly. And after billions of years, they should have cooled off so much that these liquid cores should have frozen, and you can no longer have a magnetic field. So they were very surprised that Mercury had a magnetic field, but it does, and that's an indication that it's young. We're going to look here at a comet. Okay, we've got these dirty snowballs that sometimes come in close to the sun, and when they do, okay, they lose material. They have these ices vaporize from the nucleus. You get these long, beautiful tails. And secular scientists claim that these are leftovers from the formation of the solar system billions of years ago. Okay, but they're losing mass. Okay, they're kind of like melting ice cream cones. And a typical comet can only survive for tens of thousands of years. Well, then, if comets are billions of years old, why are they still visible? Well, we think the answer is obvious. They're not billions of years old, and neither is the solar system. Okay, we think that's the simplest, most straightforward answer. Now, secular scientists, they're aware of this issue. They claim that there are these comet reservoirs that can restock the solar system with new comets as the older comets fade away. There's lots of problems with this idea, but I'm just going to give you one really obvious one. One of these reservoirs, the so-called Oort cloud, there's no direct evidence it even exists, and even the late Carl Sagan acknowledged that. Okay, so the most straightforward explanation for why we still see comets in our solar system is because the solar system is young. Now we're coming to Venus, and Venus is interesting because it rotates backwards compared to the other planets. Now, that's a problem for these nebular theories about how the solar system formed, because if it formed that way, you expect all the planets to be orbiting in the same sense, okay? And they should be spinning in the same sense. Well, Venus goes the wrong way, and that's a problem for this secular story. Moreover, the surface of Venus looks young. Even secular scientists acknowledge that, and recently they found evidence that it may very well still be geologically active. Well, that's not surprising if it's only just thousands of years old. We're going to fly on now to a planet that I hope everybody recognizes because it's home, okay? And one thing I want to point out to you is that there is much evidence on this planet that there really was a global flood like the Bible describes. Most of the land surface is covered with rocks that were deposited by water, and even evolutionary scientists acknowledge that. They acknowledge that most of these sedimentary rocks are water deposited, and within them are the remains of billions of fossilized plants and animals. And we creationists think that sounds an awful lot like the global flood. You know, there's an important point here, and that is, if the flood made those rocks and fossils within the year of the flood just 4,500 years ago, then there's no evidence for millions of years. Remember, the evolutionists are claiming that the rocks and fossils are evidence of evolution in millions of years. Well, if they were actually formed during the flood, they lose their so-called evidence for evolution. And there's lots of indications that the Earth is a lot younger than they're telling us. Secular scientists try to explain our magnetic field with what they call a dynamo theory. And they use this for all the planets. Okay, they assume that you have to have a molten core. But one of the things about this dynamo theory is that they've been working on it for about 100 years and they still can't get it to work. In fact, one geophysicist said not that long ago, we just don't know how the Earth has maintained a magnetic field for billions of years. Now, it actually gets worse than that because we know from historical measurements that the Earth's magnetic field loses about half its energy every 1,400 years. So if you run the numbers backwards, okay, not that long ago, just tens of thousands of years ago, the field would have been so strong that the current required to generate it, because electrical currents, those are what cause magnetic fields, would have been produced so much heat it would have melted the Earth's crust and mantle. Okay? So that's a strong indication that our magnetic field and the Earth have to be young. Okay? Now, I don't think, that's an upper limit. I think it's just 6,000 years old. But it's a clue that they can't be very old at all. Not even millions of years old, just thousands of years old. Now, here's our nearest body in space, the moon. And evolutionary scientists have a very hard time explaining the moon's existence. In fact, one Harvard astrophysicist is reported to have said, the best explanation for the moon is observational error. The moon doesn't exist. Okay, so that ought to give you a feel for how hard it is for them to explain the moon. Now, what's really interesting about the moon is that we have evidence that it has been recently geologically active and is probably still geologically active today. It's still cooling off, and that cooling off is causing the crust to shrink a little bit and to get this geological activity. But for the evolutionists, the problem here is that the moon, it's a small body. It should have cooled off billions of years ago. In fact, secular scientists used to dogmatically assert that the moon had been geologically dead for the last 3 billion years. We now know that is not true. Okay, so the moon looks much younger than what secular scientists are claiming. Here we're coming to the red planet. Okay, secular scientists very much want to find life on Mars. They think that will make the evolutionary story more believable. So far they haven't found it. I don't expect that they will. But another thing that's interesting about Mars is that a lot of scientists think there was catastrophic flooding on Mars. Okay, now today there's no liquid water on Mars. And what's interesting about that is you look at something like the Earth, that's basically a water world, and they say, oh, there's no evidence for a global flood. Okay, well, we think that's a little inconsistent. Okay, if you're willing to have catastrophic flooding on Mars, when there's no liquid on Mars today, why should you not at least consider the possibility that the Earth might have been flooded when most of the Earth is still underwater? Now we're going to start heading out toward the outer gas giants. And the first one we come to is Jupiter. It's real famous for its large size and its red spot. And Jupiter is losing energy to space twice as fast as it's receiving energy from the sun. And so it's cooling off. And you would think that if this thing were billions of years old, it should have already cooled off a lot more than it has. Yet it's still got a relatively high temperature. I mean, it's a low temperature compared to what we're used to, but it's a lot warmer than what you would think if it were really billions of years old. Okay? But if this thing is just a few thousands of years old, it could still be cooling off. So this is an indication that Jupiter is a lot younger than what they're telling us. Now, this is Io. This is one of Jupiter's moons. It's the most volcanically active body in the solar system. Now, secular scientists think that this volcanic activity is driven by heat. We agree with that. They think it's caused by something called tidal flexing, where you have these other bodies exerting gravitational tugs on the crust, and that crust causes it to flex, and it heats it up. And that might work, but people have done calculations, and it looks like that tidal flexing can only account for a small part of all that heat. So where's the rest of the heat coming from? Well, if God originally created Io hot, and it's only been cooling off for 6,000 years, that could be the source of that additional heat. Okay? But if you say it's billions of years old, that doesn't work. Okay? Because it would have lost that heat a long time ago. Now we're going to head to another of Jupiter's moons called Ganymede. Ganymede has a magnetic field, and it's a problem for secular scientists for the same reason that Mercury's magnetic field is a problem. If it's billions of years old, it should have cooled off long ago. And tidal flexing doesn't work as well here because it's farther away from Jupiter than Io is. Now we're going to go to Saturn, renowned for its beautiful rings. And those rings are young. Even secular scientists have to admit they can't possibly be more than 150 to 300 million years old. Now, that sounds like an old age, but remember, they're claiming Saturn is around 4.5 billion years old. And so they very reluctantly concluded that these rings have to be young because these rings are made out of ice particles and they're being constantly pelted by meteoritic dust, and you would expect them to be dark and sooty after millions of years. Well, they're not. They're still very bright and shiny and beautiful. Okay, so that's an upper limit for the age of Saturn's ring. Could they be just 6,000 years old? Yes, they could, and I believe they are. Now we're going to take a look at one of Saturn's moons, known as Titan. Now, Titan has an atmosphere that's it's mainly nitrogen, but there's some methane in the atmosphere, and that methane is being broken down by ultraviolet radiation. Now, we don't have any evidence that the methane is being replaced. And so that means Titan's atmosphere has to be relatively young. It can't be more than 10 to 100 million years old. And that's an upper limit. Okay, could it be just thousands of years old? Yes. Okay, but it can't be nearly as old as secular scientists would like to say that it is. Now we're coming to Uranus, and Uranus is interesting because the other planets, they kind of spin like tops. Uranus rolls along like a wheel. That too is a problem for this nebular theory of the solar system's formation. And Russ Humphreys, back in 1984, he predicted an approximate value for this number called the magnetic dipole moment. Now, the magnetic dipole moment it's a number that gives you the approximate size of the magnetic field of the planet. And so he predicted this, and that prediction was confirmed 2 years later in 1986 by the Voyager 2 spacecraft. And he made that prediction by assuming, based on 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 5, that God had made the heavenly bodies out of water. And then he made some other assumptions, and he turned the crank, and he was able to make this successful prediction. Now, Neptune is also interesting. It too, like Jupiter, is losing energy very rapidly. It's losing energy 2.5 times as fast as it receives it from the sun. And if anything, this is an even bigger problem for secular scientists than Jupiter is. Now, Russ Humphreys, again, back in 1984, he predicted that Neptune would have a magnetic dipole moment that's about the same size as Uranus. And guess what? He got it right again. When the Voyager 2 spacecraft flew by in 1989, he was proven right. And if you don't believe me, you can look this up. This is published. This was put in print in 1984. This is the journal article where he made those predictions. Now, you might wonder, well, how are secular scientists doing with their predictions? Well, this is what one secular physicist said back in 1989. You would have thought we would have given up guessing about planetary magnetic fields after being wrong at nearly every planet in the solar system. Okay, so they don't have very many successful predictions. And I only showed you 2 of Russ's, but he's got other predictions that were successful as well. We're going to the dwarf planet Pluto. Okay, it was demoted. It's no longer considered a planet. But we learned a lot more about it when the New Horizons spacecraft flew by. I think most of you have seen pictures like this where you've seen the heart shape on Pluto. And on that left lobe of the heart, there was not a single meteorite crater. And what a lot of geologists think is that something caused that part of Pluto to get resurfaced. Okay? And I think that's reasonable. Even in a 6,000-year-old universe, you would expect there to probably be some craters. So something probably did repave the surface there. But the problem for secular scientists is the geological activity that would do that requires heat. Okay, and how does little bitty Pluto, so far away from the sun, maintain that heat for billions of years? Okay, well, if it's not billions of years old, that's how, if it's just thousands of years old. Even planets in other solar systems, what we call exoplanets, look young. Okay, there are these exoplanets that we call hot Neptunes and hot Jupiters because they're gas giants like Neptune and Jupiter, and they're called hot because they orbit very close to their host star. Well, just last year, they found a hot Neptune planet that they were shocked because they think the age of that solar system is 2 billion years, but the planet is so close to the sun, its atmosphere is evaporating. And after 2 billion years, it should have already lost its atmosphere. Well, maybe it's not billions of years old. Maybe it's a lot younger than what they're saying. Now we're going to fly out and look down on our Milky Way galaxy. It's a spiral galaxy. Okay, we've looked at inside our solar system. Now we're going to go out into deep space. And spiral galaxies, they slowly rotate. But the material close to the center rotates faster. And so what happens is, over time, these spiral arms end up getting wound tighter and tighter and tighter. And so I'm going to show you this little animation that I made to illustrate you what this looks like. Okay, so over time, as it rotates, you're seeing those arms get wound tighter and tighter and tighter, and eventually, okay, you're not going to see any spiral structure at all. It'll just be completely obliterated, okay? Well, if that's the case, why do we still see spiral galaxies? Okay, why do they show so little winding? Secular scientists claim that many of these spiral galaxies are more than 10 billion years old, including our own. It's supposed to be more than 10 billion years old. So why do we still see this spiral structure? I mean, you can run the numbers, and even being very generous, I mean, I think you can safely say the spiral structure ought to be gone after 5 billion years, and that's being very generous. So it looks like these are a lot younger than what they're saying. And by the way, they have a theory to try to explain that called the spiral density wave theory. Doesn't work very well. They admit that it's got problems, and they've been working on it since the 1960s. Now, creationists, we also like hot blue stars. Okay, there are these hot blue stars, hot massive stars, and they're young because they ought to burn out and explode in just a few million years. Well, they're claiming that the universe is billions of years old. Well, if that's the case, why do we still see hot blue stars? Well, we think it's because the universe is a lot younger than what they're saying. They would say it's because new stars are being formed to replace them. But even an arch anti-creationist like Neil deGrasse Tyson, and if you don't know this, he does not like creationism, okay? He's admitted that these secular star formation scenarios have problems. And he wrote in a book back in 2007, he said, "The scary part is that if none of us knew in advance that stars exist, frontline research would offer plenty of convincing reasons why stars could never form." Okay? So the most straightforward explanation is that they're just young, okay? They aren't as old as they're telling us. Now, I love globular clusters. These are beautiful. They're like celestial snow globes, and that you have a bunch of them, more than 100, that orbit our Milky Way galaxy. Now, not only are they beautiful, but they're also young, because these globular clusters contain what are called supernova remnants. Okay, you have these hot, massive blue stars. They explode, and when they do, they eject this this leftover, I guess you could call it. It's a neutron star. It gets kicked out, and it gets kicked out usually pretty fast. And a lot of these neutron stars are kicked out so fast that they ought to be able to leave in thousands of years. And after billions of years, there ought to be very few of these neutron stars remaining in the globular clusters. And by the way, they claim globular clusters are among the oldest objects in the universe, many billions of years old. Well, guess what? Okay, some globular clusters contain hundreds and even thousands of neutron stars. That's another clue that these things are a lot younger than we're being told. Okay, so I hope this has been encouraging to you. Okay, our solar system looks very young. In fact, our entire universe looks younger than what the secular scientists are claiming, but that's especially true in our solar system. A creationist made some successful predictions about the magnetism of planets in our solar system, and we think that's a clue that we creationists are on the right track. Okay, now there's still issues that we're working on. Okay, I'm not sure that we've gotten the exact right answer to the issue of distant starlight, but this is a clue that we're on the right track. Okay, and so I don't think even these arguments like distant starlight are a compelling reason for a Christian to reject the Bible's straightforward testimony. You know, one of the problems that confronts both evolutionists and creationists is there's a lot we don't know. So we make assumptions, and sometimes those assumptions are wrong. Wouldn't it be nice if there was somebody who was there at the formation of the solar system, who was a reliable eyewitness, who could tell us exactly how old the universe is. Well, fortunately for us, there is such an eyewitness, and the Lord Jesus himself is that eyewitness. Okay, he was there. He was the creator. He knows how old the universe is because he made it, and he never lies and he never makes any mistakes. And he himself affirmed recent creation. In Mark chapter 10, verse 6, he said, "But from the beginning of the creation, God made them," that is Adam and Eve, "male and female." Not billions of years after an alleged Big Bang, but from the beginning of the creation. And there's actually two other verses like that in the Gospels where the Lord Jesus implicitly affirms a recent creation. We ought to take his word for it. He's the creator. If anybody knows how old the universe is, he does. I want to show you this little clip from our ICR DVD series, The Universe, A Journey Through God's Grand Design, just to show you the beauty and majesty that the Lord Jesus made. And he deserves the glory for making this. Not nature, not an alleged Big Bang, but the Lord Jesus Christ deserves the glory for making all these beautiful heavenly wonders that we see out in space. These are some of the sources that I used in constructing this little video. If you'd like to learn more, please visit our website, icr.org, and we've got lots of resources for you. Unfortunately, we're running out of some of them. Okay, we've got the Guide to Creation Basics, which is a good overview of the whole creation evolution controversy. And these books have lots of illustrations in them. They're good for even young people, middle school and teenagers. And then we've got the Guide to the Universe that's similar, but it deals specifically with the universe and how astronomy confirms creation, okay, and that the universe is not billions of years old. We've also got a book called Creation Basics and Beyond. It's a paperback, and it's written for lay people, but it's got lots of footnotes, okay? So if you want ammunition to answer skeptics, okay, when they object to what the Bible says, this is a great handbook because we've covered pretty much all of the main topics. We've also got some resources for younger kids to learn about space and Earth. And we've got a series of DVDs called What You Aren't Being Told About Astronomy. They're made by creation researcher Spike Passaris. These have gotten rave reviews, even from professional scientists who are creationists. People love these, and I love them too. They're great. He really exposes the folly of evolutionary thinking, and he does it in a pretty funny and winsome way. So that's another great resource for you. You can get all three of them, or you can just get one, but they're really wonderful resources. And then we've got our Universe DVD series that I mentioned earlier, and I'd like to just go ahead and show you a little promo clip to show you what you can expect when you order this DVD series.
The history of astronomy is a story of discovery, a quest for knowledge. It's the story of mankind trying to get a glimpse into the mind of God. Lift up your eyes to the heavens. Who created all of this?
There's something in the human nature, and I would say it's because we bear the image of God, that seeks to understand the things around us.
And now I'm going to put in a totally shameless plug for my book, The Ice Age and Climate Change. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about, okay? Most of my serious research up to now has involved the Ice Age. And this is a question a lot of Christians have questions about, not only the Ice Age, but what about this issue of global warming? And I'd love to tell you to go back there and get copies, but we're all sold out. However, okay, if you go back there, our representatives can give you a special code where you can still get a 20% discount on this book if you order it. And it's got some really good stuff in here. In fact, one of my favorite parts is there's a climate scandal nobody else is talking about except us creationists, and it's a doozy. And there's some great stuff in here. Why the deep ice cores don't prove an old Earth, even though Bill Nye thinks they do. Okay, what are some of the problems with secular ice age theories? And as a bonus, you all may remember the Snowmageddon we had in February. I don't want to be dogmatic about it, but I think there's probably a connection between that and the stuff I was researching at the University of Texas at Dallas when I was working on my PhD. And I explain how that theory or that explanation works. So those are just some resources for you. Please, if nothing else, if you don't do anything else, please sign up for our free magazine, Acts and Facts. It comes to your home free every month, and each month we have articles answering tough questions about creation versus evolution. Okay, so I hope this little talk has been a blessing to you. I hope you'll come back tomorrow because we've got a lot more we'd like to share with you. Thank you.